All right, so just to catch up on lecture, I decided to lecture today. So most of you will be watching this through the recording, which is fine. This will not be included on the exam, okay? So chapters 11 through 15 are on the exam. All right, the origins of animal diversity. So just like how we went through plant diversity, we're going to be going through early animal diversity here. We will not get to the chordates or chordata, which are the animals that do have a spinal cord or central nervous system that's protected by bone or some sort of structure. So um, we will not get to there, but we will cover a couple of primitive organisms and see how they developed through the evolutionary time scheme. Okay. All right. So what is an animal? An animal is a eukaryotic, multicellular, heterotrophic organism that obtains nutrients by ingestion. Okay. So heterotrophic meaning breaking down of organic materials in order to gain your energy, in order to gain your ATP for work or building blocks for the cell. Okay. Fungi are heterotrophic, but they all are also saprophytic, meaning that they secrete digestive enzymes outside of their bodies or outside of their cells in order to break down whatever food supply that they want, right? So think of the breakdown of starch in the secretion of amylase, right? We carry amylase in our saliva, right? So we consume starch, we break that starch down into glucose, and then we ingest it, right? Whereas a fungi or a fungus will secrete amylase outside of their tissues, outside of their cells, breaking down that starch, and then they can absorb the glucose that way. Okay, so very different mechanisms of ingestion there. Um, Animal cells also lack cell walls found in fungi, such as chitin and plant cellulose. Okay, so we do not have cell walls. That means it's very difficult for us to regulate under high salt stress environments. Okay, and what that means is I gave that example with drowning in salt water and fresh water, right? You can damage your lung tissue. Um, Worse if you go into a hypotonic environment, right? Which means the water will enter the cell and cause that cell to burst. Fungi and plants have cell walls to prevent that from occurring. We do not. Okay, we lack the cell wall for protection and stability under high osmotic stress environments. Okay, so high or low salt environments. All right. So a few animals ingest a piece of food as large as a gazelle being eaten by a rock python. The snake will spend 2 weeks or more digesting its meal. A lot of reptiles do this, right? They can consume a large meal in one sitting and then not have to eat for a long time. Uh, if I believe a couple of sharks are this way too, right? There's a Greenland shark, um, which is a deep cold water shark. Alligators do this, right? They can go long periods of time without having to eat um, food. For the most part, mammals are really not like this, unless you have hibernation events where they, eat or consume a large amount of calories right before they spend their winters in a den. But again, ingestion is key for animals, right? Eating or consuming, putting something inside of ourselves during the consumption process is the key defining feature of animals in comparison to fungi. Okay, animal reproduction. So we have male and female have haploid gametes, right? You get one chromosome from mom, one chromosome from dad, and those make those homologous pairs, right? And they fuse together to form a zygote. Zygote divides by mitosis, forming a blastula. Okay, so blastula is an embryonic stage that marks the end of cleavage during animal development. A hollow ball of cells in many species, right? Gastrula is the embryonic stage resulting from gastrulation. In animal development, most animals have a gastrula made up of three layers of cells: ectoderm, endoderm, and mesoderm. Okay, larva, an immature individual that looks different from the adult animal. And then we have metamorphosis, the transformation of larva into an adult. Okay, so larva can be like um, the caterpillar. Metamorphosis is going to be referring to the butterfly, right? So larval stage and then metamorphosis stage. You see this also with mosquitoes, right? They have the swimming young in the water, and then eventually they develop into the large mosquitoes. Okay, and we'll see gastrula and blastula right now in this image. So here we have the life cycle of a sea star. Excuse me. The fertilization, the zygote. We have mitosis occurring, right? So once you have the haploid sperm and the haploid egg fusing to form that zygote, you have mitosis, not meiosis, right? Meiosis gives you your sex cells. You have the division, you have the blastula, which is you see that it's kind of a pocket of cells growing, early gastrulation, and then you start having the later gastrulation, which is the invagination or that pocket, right, forming inside of that cell. So this is going to be cell differentiation occurring here, right? So I know we're taking a test this week on genetics and eukaryotic, understanding eukaryotic cells, right? So this is a key feature of eukaryotes, right? They start dividing and they start differentiating cell types. Okay, um, so here you just have the development or the differentiation of cells in order to make that multicellular organism, right? So this gastrulation and then eventual formation of the mesoderm, ectoderm, and endoderm is going to be important for development of complex life, right? You have uh, um, these ectoderm, endoderm, mesoderm being the layers of tissue that animals contain, right? So the ectoderm, of course, is going to be made up of the skin and other features. Endoderm is the internal structures or organs, which is various body cavities, and the mesoderm, the blood, I think lymph. Yeah, I think this is a nervous blood. No, this is nervous tissue, um, organ systems, and then here we have the mesoderm, which is I think a couple of organ systems, and then the blood and or hemolymph, some sort of fluid that'll be maintained inside of that organism. Okay, so very different developmental features and characteristics which are important for animals. Okay, early animals and the Cambrian explosion. So we're going to be kind of walking through the various developmental stages that have occurred on Earth with various different organisms. Okay, starting with the early, very primitive organisms, all the way to um, insects and more complex life. Okay, so earliest fossils discovered were about 560 million years ago. Much earlier single-celled organisms must have existed because these fossils were much larger than single-celled organisms, right? So it's really difficult to date microorganisms just because carbon-14 is not going to be as present in those organisms, and it will be harder to radiocarbon date. We can see larger fossils and identify larger fossils, and then we're able to extract and look for the carbon-14, whereas single-celled organisms are going to be difficult. Right? If it's really small, it's going to be hard to get a sample, hard to radiocarbon date. Animal diversification accelerated rapidly from 535 to 525 million years ago during the Cambrian period. Okay, the fossil record provided this evidence. So we have a hypothetical common ancestor of animals. As you'll learn shortly, the individual cells of this colonial flagellated proteus resemble the feeding cells of sponges, right? And we'll talk about sponges in a minute. But early life developing in the Cambrian era was very diverse. So they saw a lot of very unique features, very unique organisms, and it was an explosion of life. Much of those organisms are extinct today, but you see early on in the fossil record things that worked and features that are carried on to organisms that we see today. Okay, so it kind of gives us evidence of either evolution or organisms that will have later developed into something that was more similar to what we see today. All right. So all the oldest animal fossils are impressions of soft-bodied animals. Most of them do not appear to be related to any living group of animals now. So we have a sea pen, so possibly related to cnidarians, right? So again, you see a lot of these very unique, very distinct organisms in the Precambrian era. And this is why they refer to this as an explosion of life, because you see a large variation of organisms there, which is really important and actually really interesting. Okay, so the Earth at the time has had the ability to support very diverse life um, on it. Another thing too, you got to think about the amount of development means that there had to be a lot of niches that these organisms can utilize, right? Predator prey options, feeding or foraging options, right? So there must have been a huge explosion of life at the base of that food pyramid. All right. Here's just another fossil, kind of showing you another interesting shape of organism here. All right, so this drawing is based on fossils from Baris Shale. The flat-bodied animals are extinct arthropods called trilobites. A photo of a fossil trilobite is shown at the right. So here we have um, a trilobite, and we have a couple here. These look like horseshoe crabs. We still have horseshoe crabs, so those are a very ancient, um, early evolved organism, the horseshoe crabs. You see the jellies and a few other organisms that almost look like arthropods, okay, and cucumbers. So very, very different, a lot of different varieties are shown here, okay? All right, understanding diversity and phylogeny, okay? So a major branch point in animal evolution distinguishes sponges from all other animals based on structural complexity, okay? So radial symmetry, excuse me, an arrangement of the body parts of an organism like pieces of a pie around an imagery, central axis, imaginary central axis. Any slice passing longitudinal through a radial symmetric organism, a central axis divides the organisms. So we'll see that this is going to be less complex. Okay, radial symmetry means that they are the same no matter how you slice that organism. Okay, think of a circular organism, think of an organism shaped like a pie, think of a box shaped or square shaped organism, right? They're going to be simplistic. They're not going to have cephalization. What cephalization means is like a head that can arrange the body in a certain orientation, right? So bilateral symmetry is arrangement of body parts such as an organism can be divided equally by a single cut passing longitudinally through it. That means is that you have you can only form a mirror image of that animal, which means it can only be divided like humans down the middle. Okay, we cannot be cut in any other form that will give us equal shared parts, whereas radial symmetry does, right? It's like a pie or a cake. You can cut that cake in half in multiple different locations. Bilateral symmetry doesn't allow that, right? We can only be sliced equally down the middle because we are cephalized, because we have a head, eyes, mouth in one part of our body. Okay, and that shows complexity. That shows development of complexity, right? We utilize different organ systems in order to move and navigate the world. We have a body cavity, a fluid-filled space separating the digestive tract from the outer body wall. This is another important developmental feature. Early organisms didn't have body cavities or digestive systems, right? The more complex the digestive system, again, the more complex the organism typically. So radial symmetry, again, think of this organism as a cake. You can divide it in multiple planes, okay? So again, pie, cake, I'm thinking of desserts right now. I guess anything that can be divided um, in equal parts if you slice it no matter what way, okay? So the orientation doesn't matter. Think of a bottle cap, circle, very simple. Okay, bilateral symmetry is showing more development. Okay, you have the eyes and mouth, antennae. You have your claws here, different legs. You have body segments, right? This lobster again will have multiple different areas of arrangement, right? The armor or the outside plating of that organism, again, can it's unique to one side of that body. Okay, the big developmental feature that you do see is the eyes. Okay, organisms developing eyes in the front of their body. Again, that is a huge milestone for many organisms. Cephalization, so having orientation to the body again, is a key to a more complex life. Okay. So here we have body plans of bilateral animals. Various organ systems of these animals develop from three tissue layers that form the embryo, right? So we talked about the endoderm, ectoderm, and mesoderm, right? So here we have a no body cavity. So this is like a flatworm, okay? You have body covering, you have digestive tract, and you have a tissue filled region. Excuse me. Here we have an organism, an earthworm, with a true body cavity, right? So we have a body covering, we have tissue layer, lining cavity, and suspended internal organs, and then we do have a digestive tract. Okay, we do have a true body cavity, right? We are quite complex compared to most of the animals in the animal kingdom. Um, think of the peritoneal cavity, the parietal cavity, the pericardium, right? Those areas in the body are true cavities. We have fluid-filled sacs kind of contained around inside of that area in order to prevent friction or damage. But you can essentially eviscerate your organs, right, and pull them out and lay them on a table, right? There is space inside of your body to separate out your different organ systems. Okay. All right, an invertebrate, so major invertebrate phyla, we'll be talking about this for the rest of the lecture, an animal that does not have a backbone, okay? So sponges are the first on the list. So very simple, early life. This is the outgroup to kind of most of the other organisms that we'll be talking about. Sponges, they're in the phylum Porifera, so you might hear me say porifera or sponges, same thing. So an aquatic stationary animal characterized by a highly porous body, conocytes, and no tissues, right? Simplest of all animals, sponges evolved very early. The associated cells are not organized enough to be considered tissues, but do react to their environment through various stimuli or environmental changes. The size is 1 centimeter to 2 meters, with majority living in salt water. We do have freshwater sponges, but the amount of diversity in sponges or porifera is immense in the ocean. There is a lot of sponges that live in the ocean. There are suspension feeders, animals that collect food from water, passing through a type of food trap. Okay, so sac with holes almost. Specialized flagellated cells called conocytes sweep particles through the filter cells. Okay, and the filter cells are what pick up any nutrient that's going to be present or passing through that sponge. So here is a sponge. We see here, to obtain enough food to grow, by 3 ounces, the sponge must filter feed 275 gallons of water through its body, enough to fill 3.5 typical sized bathtubs. All right, and these organisms again can be quite large or quite small, depending on the species. Okay, so you do have these pores, you have these conocytes feeding cells that are going to be creating a vent or almost like a sucking um, motion, right? So these cells, these flagellated cells, create this sucking motion, and then you have um, these amoebocytes that are going to be picking up the food. Okay. So again, these jobs, the cells of these, the jobs of these cells, these conocytes, are to create a vortex, to create that suction power, to pull in the water, to be filtering out anything that's going to be floating by. The amoebocyte is then going to allow for the food to be picked up through these pores. Okay, and then it will feed the rest of the structure. Okay, so again, these are organized animals, but they're very simple, very early developed and not complex. Okay, people use sponges a lot of the time for industrial use. You can buy sponges to clean as almost like a loofah to clean your body, but they also use sponges as industrial um, cleaning material. Okay, um, very sturdy. So after you wash the sponge or treat the sponge, you clear out all the living tissue. That skeleton that's left by the sponge is actually very resistant to damage and very resistant to abuse. Okay, so sponges are very sturdy. All right, cnidarians. So cnidarian is the animal characterized by the cnidocytes, radial symmetry, and gastrovascular cavity. and a polyp or medusa body form. Cnidarians include hydras, jellies, sea anemones, and corals. And so jellies referring to jellyfish. Okay. Gastrovascular cavity, it's a digestive compartment with a single opening that serves as both the entrance for food and the exit for undigested waste. Um, so like a common sewer mouth, okay? May also function in circulation, body support, and gas exchange. Jellies and hydras are examples of animals with a gastrovascular cavity. So very primitive body cavities, okay? A polyp, one of two types of cnidarian body forms, a stationary column, hydra-like body. Medusa, one of two types of cnidarian body forms, a floating umbrella-like body form called a jelly. Okay, so we'll see those two right now. Okay, and so polyp or medusa forms of cnidarians. So we do have that gastrovascular cavity. We have the mouth or a mouth anus. So I call it the common sewer. It's both mouth and I guess anus. Yeah. So we have a tentacle here that can have uh, stinging cells as well. So you do see that in the developmental stages of cnidarian. So a lot of them are poisonous. A lot of them do have venom. I should say they're not poisonous. Venom that is used to help with hunting or trapping of prey. Okay. Um, Again, jellyfish, hydras, sea anemones all belong to this group. They all can bring in or pull in food into that central cavity and then have the digestion occur in that gastrovascular cavity. Okay. So here we have the same developmental stages. We have that body cavity, the gastrovascular cavity. We have these stinging cells, again, that are used to trap prey. Then they can use those cells to transfer or pull in prey up into the gastrovascular cavity for digestion. Okay. All right. So here we have a hydra. We have prey, right, and then we have the development of these tentacles. So when a trigger to a tentacle is stimulated by touch, a fine thread shoots out from the capsule from some cnidocyte thread, entangled prey, while others puncture the prey and inject a poison. Okay. Um, so they do have specialized cells. They're almost like hooks. So think of jellyfish, right? They have those tiny cells that are going to be venomous, and they're going to inject those very fine needles into the tissue. And some of the jellyfish do have very powerful venom, right? Think of the box jellyfish, right? Um, that kills a lot of people every year. Okay, so these organisms can be quite venomous. All right. So yeah, interesting little things. Mollusca. So mollusks are a soft body animal characterized by a muscular foot, mantle cavity, and radula. So radula is going to be kind of their mouth and teeth component, right? A radula is going to be a really sandpaper-like development in their mouth they use to rasp or scrape their prey to break it down. Mollusks include gastropods, snails and slugs, bivalves, clams, oysters and scallops, and cephalopods, squids and octopus. Excuse me. A radula, a file-like organ found in many mollusks, typically used to scrape up or shred food. Mantle in mollusks, the outgrowth of the body surface that drapes over the animal. The mantle produces a shell and forms a mantle cavity. Okay, so here's a body cavity shown, much more developed organism. So you see there is a development of nerve cords. They have a digestive tract. They have reproductive organs, a heart, gills for gas exchange, right? Um, so you do have a more developed organism here, right? Mollusks are very much more developed, and you do have the shell for protection, right? Here's a radula. This is going to be almost like their teeth or mouth-like projections that are used to scrape or process food before entering into that digestive tract. Okay. Gastropods, members of the largest group of mollusks, include snails and slugs. Bivalve, members of a group of mollusks that include clams, mussels, scallops, and oysters. Cephalopod. Excuse me. Member of a group of mollusks that include squids and octopuses. All right, so here we have the major groups of mollusks. We have gastropods, again, the snails with the radula, sea slug, bivalves. Then you have scallops, many eyes with small round structures peering out between the two halves of the shells. Okay. We also have cephalopods, which are very intelligent, typically very intelligent organisms. So octopus, again, very intelligent, but very highly developed in terms of brain function. So they live on seafloor where they search for crabs and other food. They have no shell. The brain of an octopus is larger and more complex, proportionate to the body size than that of any other invertebrate. Okay. Nautilus. So nautilus is a shell of nautilus is a coiled series of chambers. The animal inhabits only the outermost chamber. The other chambers contain gas and fluid that enable the nautilus to regulate its buoyancy. Okay. And you've probably seen these too. They kind of float and have they move by what is it? They have like a suction and pressure system. They suck in water and they push out, and it's like a nice fluid movement that they have. Okay. Um, they don't use these tentacles for swimming. They use it more for directional control. Okay. So interesting organisms there. Flatworms. A bilateral animal with a thin, flat body, form a gastrovascular cavity with a single opening and no body cavity. Flatworms include pelarians, flukes, and tapeworms. So a lot of parasitic worms are found in this this group of organisms, this phylum. Okay, so they do have a digestive tract. You do have a mouth, eye spots, right? Nervous tissue clustered, simple brain. Um, Here you have a tapeworm. This is a scolex. The scolex contains a head, the hooks, and this is what attaches to your intestinal wall when you do have a tapeworm. Okay, so tapeworms also have these things called proglottids, and each of these proglottids, these segments, contain both male and female gametes. Okay, and tapeworms are hermaphroditic, so they will mate with themselves and then dump millions and millions of eggs into your feces to infect other individuals. Okay. Um, Flukes are also a huge problem as well. There's something called a liver fluke. Um, what can I think of the other flukes then? They can cause a lot of issues. Okay. They can poke around in organ systems if you're infected. There are flukes that inhabit mollusca. So these snails here, you've seen snails, local snails in the area. There have been people that have attempted to eat those snails, trying to copy French cuisine, I'm assuming with the escargot. And if you undercook or do not properly prepare those snails, or if the snails just happen to be contaminated with these certain fluke worms, you can develop a serious infection. Okay. And people have died from being infected with these parasitic worms. All right, so don't eat the snails unless they've been processed correctly. Um, so yeah, again, these flatworms provide they they have a lot of parasitic worms that are seen that are relevant for humans and relevant for plants. But these are more developed. So fish tapeworm larvae are found in species that live or breed in freshwater fish. So um, I think in Fresno, maybe I think it was last year, there was a person that had been eating a lot of sushi, especially salmon. Salmon carry a lot of parasites, and he consumed so much sushi that he ended up getting infected with a sea tapeworm. Okay, and it ended up being like 15 feet long, and he freaked out because he thought he was defecating out an organ, or he thought he was defecating out his actual intestines. So it was quite interesting. Okay. But again, these are quite common. There's beef, pork tapeworms, there's fish tapeworms. there's these flukes. They can there's liver fluke. There's flukes that can get into your blood system and then your lymph nodes and cause swelling or edema in different parts of the body. So these organisms can be quite nasty. Okay. All right. So annelids. So a segmented worm, annelids include earthworms, polychaetes, and leeches. Okay. So body segmentation, so subdivision of animal's body into a series of repeated parts called segments. Complete digestive tract, a digestive tube with two openings in mouth and anus. Okay. Segmented anatomy of an earthworm. Here you have the cephalization, so you do have a mouth, you do have directionality to the body, you have a brain, accessory hearts, so you do have like a hemolymph, which is like the fluid that surrounds or gets pushed through with the heart, and a digestive tract. Okay. Excuse me. And again, earthworms, you do have that true body cavity. Okay, so you'll see that body cavity. You have different organ systems as well found in the worm. Excuse me. All right, annelid divert. It should be diversity. Sorry, I'll change it right now. It's so bad typo. All right. Arachian, a member of a major annelid lineage that includes mostly marine worms with an active lifestyle, and sedentarian, so a member of a major annelid lineage that includes earthworms, leeches, and many tube-building marine worms. Okay, and we'll talk about the sedentary ones. Arachian, so the head of the common ragworm has started to burrow into the sediment. Notice a pair of appendages on each body segment, right? So it looks very similar to what you see in centipedes or millipedes, but again, very different developmental features. Okay. So not as closely related as you would think, but they do look like centipedes or millipedes. Sedentarian, these are going to be those tube dwellers. These worms are in deep ocean vents. You can also see these worms in coral. And they typically do have bacteria or some sort of symbiont living closely with this organism. Okay, so something closely growing in unison with these worms. Okay, and then here's a leech. So a medicinal leech. Medicinal leeches are used to break down or prevent swelling from occurring too much. Right, you can have issues, especially with like crushing wounds or crushing injuries. So if your hand gets crushed, you have potential to lose that hand if the edema or the swelling is too much, right? If you have the swelling occurring in the hand, you can have loss of blood flow and then eventual necrosis. Leeches can help mediate that, right? You place them on the distal appendage in order to kind of remove the blood and get rid of that swelling or edema that's preventing that normal blood flow from occurring into your hands. Okay, so leeches can be quite useful. All right. Roundworms. So roundworms are nematodes, the phyla Nematoda. Very common parasites here. We see a lot of Ascaris worms. We see filarial worm disease, but an animal characterized by a cylindrical worm-like body, forming a complete digestive tract, also called nematoda or nematode. All right. A free-living roundworm, this species has a classic roundworm shape, cylindrical with tapered ends. The ridges indicate muscles that run the length of the body. Okay, so these move. These organisms do move. I guess I failed to mention that earlier, but the flatworms, the tapeworm. I'll just use a tapeworm as an example because it's easier to use. Very underdeveloped in terms of the mouth, the organ system. They are segmented, but these perchlottids, again, are going to be the hermaphroditic units of the body. These organisms do not move in the bowel, okay? These organisms don't swim. You'll have them inside of you, and you will never even know they exist until you defecate out one of these perchlottids, and then you can start raising a flag and be concerned because you're pooping out pieces of a worm, which can be quite scary for some people, okay? Actually, I'd be freaked out. I think most people would be scared. But these organisms do not move. They don't create much of a problem unless you have a self-inoculation event, which we won't get into. Yeah, but that's more micro stuff. But again, no movement, sessile. They don't have a gut. They don't have a respiratory tract. The food and the nutrient they have is going to be pulled from the host. Okay, whereas roundworms and nematodes, they do move. These guys can get into body parts. They can perforate the bowel. If there is too high of a number, they can rupture a bowel. So these organisms can be quite devastating for people that are infected with them. Okay, parasitic roundworms import potentially fatal disease. Trichinosis is caused by eating undercooked pork infected with Trichinella roundworms. The worms shown here in pork tissue burrow into a person's intestines and invade the muscle tissue. Okay, so again, this is why they tell you to cook pork thoroughly. You cannot eat undercooked pork because of Trichinella. Okay, not very, very much not a good infection to have. So sometimes you'll see the individuals with balls of growths throughout their body or arms or calves. And again, this is from Trichinella. So these worms can burrow into tissue and create encystments. Okay. And again, the burrowing events, since we are a secondary or not an appropriate host, those worms burrowing into our body actually can cause much more problems than that, right? If they're penetrating the bowel, they can go through organ systems, causing bodily harm or damage. Okay, so not a good infection to have. Cook your pork. So head of a hookworms sink their hooks into the wall of a host's small intestine and feed on blood. Although the worms are small, less than 1 centimeter, a severe infestation can cause serious anemia. Okay, and again, these worms can burrow in various different organ systems as well and cause issues. Okay, yeah. One of the interesting worms that I talked about in my micro course is filarial worm diseases, which again are roundworms, and you actually get infected through mosquitoes. Okay, and they cause elephantiasis. So those worms actually burrow into your out of your bowel or out into the blood, into your lymph system, and they cause a swelling of the distal appendages, and they cause elephantiasis of that appendage. Okay, so again, very, very annoying and intrusive organisms those are, and very severe infections. All right, arthropod diversity, major groups of arthropods. We have arachnids, crustaceans, millipedes and centipedes, and insects. Okay, so the more developed organisms are insects. Excuse me. General characteristics of arthropods. Arthropods have a hard covering called an exoskeleton. Exoskeleton is a hard external skeleton that protects an animal and provides points of attachment for muscles. Okay, so we have internal skeletons, they have exoskeletons, right? So our bones are our internal skeleton that do have attachment points, right? We do have ligaments and tendons, again, that can provide those attachment points between bone to bone or bone to muscle. Okay. All right, and that is it for today. We're going to cover the rest of this on tomorrow, actually. Sorry, I was going to say on Thursday, but we'll cover it tomorrow. Okay, any questions? I know it's just you, Jasmine, so if you don't have any questions, that's fine.
Actually, I just wanted to ask, like, when the test was, I forgot.
The test? Oh, it's I'm going to upload it today. So you'll have 2 days to take it.
Okay.
Yeah, but the review should be up. So if you haven't watched the review, I would go ahead and watch that review.
Okay, thank you.
No problem.